Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi everybody and welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. My name is Shambhavi Naik and I have the pleasure of hosting an episode after about 7 long months. I'm glad to meet everybody again, and the reason I was away is because I've just had a baby daughter, and that actually moves me to the topic of today's discussion. Having undergone parental leave myself and looking at companies around me, countries around me, which are pushing to the idea that there has to be a gender neutral parental leave policy. Today, I team up with two other Takshashila moms and a Takshashila dad to speak about how India should approach gender neutral leave policies. Joining me today is Sowmya, Suman, and Sridhar. And first of all, let's just talk about what everybody feels about gender neutral leave policy. Starting with you, Suman.
Yeah, it's been a while since I had my son. So the policies existing then and now have seen some kind of a change and in the right direction in a lot of ways. The societal view around parental leave is also changing very, very slowly, but there is some change nevertheless. And the policies around that have contributed to some change. Having said that, rushing to a neutral or an equal parental leave policy has its own pitfalls. Firstly, because I feel, and it's a known fact, that giving birth is not a gender neutral thing as such. That is, women go through a lot more in the process of giving birth than men. Okay, physiology and everything else that comes after that. So to say that everybody will get equal is not right. It has to be an equitable situation, equitable policy as such. That is, women will definitely get more leave than men. Yeah. And what the policy around, first of all, from an India context, we are talking about a very small percentage of population which is in the formal workforce. So whatever we do, we are just scratching the surface. But this is an important demographic that we should be looking at, because that is the start point for anything. And then it percolates down. You can look at how it percolates down. So in that sense, it's a very important topic to be discussing at this point in time. That's all I had.
Thanks, Owen. That's a very interesting idea to have a gender equitable policy. I think when I think about gender neutral policy, for me, it recognizes two things. One is that there are genders beyond what we consider have been considered normal for ages, and we are beginning to recognize that look, that is not true, and also that in terms of parental care, that the primary caregiver responsibility, in addition to the traditionally looked upon mother, can be other things. And I think that will be my understanding of gender neutral. But I agree. I mean, the mother obviously goes through, any biological mother obviously goes through a lot more than the other caregivers. But whether that is sufficient to say that others do not get as much leave as she does, that's a very interesting point to make. And let's hear what the others think about that. Soumya?
Yeah. Hi, Shambhavi. Thanks, Suman, for that good start. I think, it's been many years that I availed the maternity leave benefit, and I found it really useful at that point because 3 months of leave certainly gave me the window to kind of cope with all the mothering elements that you're new to. But what also happened was I was with an organization which was very employee friendly, and the fact that I was the youngest employee in the organization, and I was probably the first few who wanted to avail a benefit of having a creche in house. We started thinking about it, and in fact, by the time I was ready to come back, we set up something small. So, and not with too much cost, but something very functional. But that certainly helped me get back to work in the 4th month with a little bit of flexibility to come back home early. So I would say what was very empowering for me was just that a workplace is so invested in ensuring that you get back to work, and also creating an atmosphere that many more mothers to come will have this was something that was liberating in a way. what I struggled with at that point was, and I'm still to understand how it works in different places, is whether father could also bring the child and use the creche facility was something that we were grappling with. We didn't have a use case, but I feel that was something for us to kind of work on. And interestingly, that was also a phase when a couple of people I had met in the corporate world were looking at adopting children, and they had workplaces which were very conducive and supportive. So, which meant that everybody continued to have their family life balance and also were able to get back to work seamlessly. And specifically, Shambhavi, on the gender neutral thing, I think the society is moving towards being more aware about different things like LGBTQ and surrogacy and other things. So it makes sense for us to consider thinking about gender neutral parental leave policy.
Sure. Thanks, Sowmya. And finally, I think, Sridhar, I think you would have the most nuanced take on this idea.
Yeah, as the only father in this group, right? So thank you very much, Shambhavi, and congratulations, first of all, on becoming a mother. I think
Thanks.
it's wonderful. And yeah, I became like Sowmya and Suman. I too became a father many years ago, and probably even before Sowmya and Suman. But I think at the time that I became a father, I don't think the idea of men taking time off to stay at home and look after the child was not even, what do you say, discussed very seriously. Yeah, it was not given any amount of seriousness at all. It was like, I mean, maybe you would talk about it at some dinner party or something, saying, yeah, I think like, men need to know what it is like to stay back and do this. You were aware at that point that women are making big sacrifices to their careers, etc., in order to become a mother. But it was sort of accepted as sort of the norm. And I think I personally feel sorry that I didn't understand the nuanced impact that these things had on my wife's career, for instance, and didn't step in adequately at that point. I mean, that's the way I would look at it. And my wife did take significant time off to have a child. We were moving cities at that time, so she ended up actually staying out of work for what, almost 4 years. So I think she bore the brunt of on her career on account of becoming a parent. And I think the gender neutral parental leave can fix that in some sense. It makes it also it makes it clear that society expects men to also step in and take care of their child and participate in the bringing up the child. And therefore, I think it will make for a better society. And that's why I think I'm also in favor of a gender neutral parental leave, alongside, of course, other other groups, right? I mean, I think not just regular heterosexual parents, but also parents who are same sex or belong to LGBTQ, etc. They should also be able to benefit from parental leave, and not just women.
Thanks, Sridhar. I've seen this very interesting trend that whenever I speak about the idea of gender neutral paternity or paternity leave or even paternity leave by itself, right? I often get this idea that, hey, look, yeah, it's going to help the mother. And I started writing a blog on this last week. And even my blog, I found it very gendered around the fact that, hey, if fathers take more leave, the mothers will benefit. And it got me thinking that, look, no, I still have this idea that taking care of the baby is the mother's role, and the father taking leave is going to help the mother.
Yeah, I just want to bring this book, Invisible Women. I was just reading through it. When I read through it, I found something very interesting in the book. It says that they have found studies. I mean, there have been multiple studies done which say that men who take paternity leave tend to be more involved in childcare and in the future of the child. Also, they have circled it back to a Swedish study that found that a mother's future earnings increase by an average of 7% for every month of leave taken by the father. So we have to keep in mind the other realities around maternity leave or parental leave for that matter, which is gender pay gap. The most important thing is the gender pay gap. Why do people, I mean, The question of why are fathers not taking leave even when when it is there available for them is that, because when they give parental or paternity leave as such, it is not 100% of wages. Okay. After wherever there is paternity leave, after a few weeks, after a few months, they get a lesser amount than the 100%. So when that is there, and there is also a pay gap. So the incentive for the father, or considering family finances, etc., really the father does not have much of a choice than to go back to work, right? So other issues that get get mired into this is the gender pay gap issue. So that is also something that we need to take into consideration when we design a parental leave policy.
Sure.
I was reading this. This is research done by a Bell State sociology professor by name Richard Pence. And he mentions that only 5% of dads who are eligible, in the US at least, take 2 weeks or more of paternity leave. Right. And the expectation from the father is that their primary role is that of a financial provider. And if that is what society sort of expects men to do, then and then if they take time off to put their families first, they get criticized. Like for instance, the U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, he was
Great.
criticized for taking parental leave recently, right? So I think when society doesn't sort of feel that it's the role of men to be doing these things, that if men are not providing financially and prioritizing being financial providers, prioritizing their job over their family, then they are looked upon as people who are not committed enough and don't care enough, and therefore sort of are criticized. And women who don't look after the child are criticized similarly, right? So I think then it sort of forces people to go and fall into those buckets and stay there. But I think we have to fight it and change. I mean, you can't keep worrying about society criticizing you. You've got to do what you have to do. And I like that other mention you made about women's income increasing by 7% for every month that the father
Yeah.
spends on paternity leave. I think that's an interesting study. And I think McKinsey also did a similar study and found that same data. So I think that's quite important.
I think
So
the
yeah.
cultural mores around it also play a role. I mean, mostly that plays a role. This kind of reaction was also seen in Japan. The the reaction to paternity leave as such, because Japan is a society which looks down upon holidays, or even those kind of things also. So a man taking off to look after a baby is completely out of whack for them. So a lot of it plays into that. So contrast this to the Nordic countries of Sweden, Iceland, and stuff like that. There you see a completely different, a completely different game going through there. So I think, yeah, it's a lot of that also comes into play.
But in the Indian context, what I would say is we have a support structure in place, right? Predominantly, it's been that, the grandparents are around, or there's an extended family that supports in the caregiving component of the child, right? So, a lot of people, at least in my own experience, I've seen have requested that can we push the paternity leave for later because currently I have support at home. But of course, there is a limitation there where the organizations will insist that within the first few months you have to avail it. So I would say the societal structure is also a reason why sometimes people wouldn't want to use that leave. And even for a lot of people, the second child, and they would go to their mom's place, so they're in different locations. Things like that used to be a reason why paternity leave was not availed by a lot of people. But women did go through this phase where you come back from a maternity break, and then a lot of organizations are thinking twice to hire because there's a gap. So you've got to upskill yourself. So, some amount of coaching and other things need to be given to come up to speed. So I would say it also, in a way, hampers the ability for a woman to come back to workplaces, because if they extend the maternity break, it's also that you're not in touch with things and you've got to cope with that.
You know, some of the more, what do you say, forward thinking companies, and I mean, I worked for one such a while back, and the approach there was, I mean, there were clear guidelines during performance management season that one should not distinguish between somebody who's on parental leave and someone who's working when it comes to ratings. So look at their rate performance during the period that they were at work and rate them for that. And the same rating should be given to them irrespective of whether they happen to be on maternity leave for a significant portion of that
Appraisal year.
performance cycle, appraisal period. So I think, and I've known cases where some of my women colleagues have been promoted while they were on maternity leave, and significant promotions at that, right? So I think those things too happen in some companies, but I'm sure that there are very few of them. The most of the companies will sort of look at these people and just do what is statutorily required of them, pay them the wages that are due for those 3 months or 6 months, as it is 26 weeks that it is now, and do not much more, and really value employees who come back early from parental leave. And they are talked about as though look at this person, she came back to work within like a month of giving birth to a child. I think she's truly committed. We need to have more people like her, right? I think that's the approach that most organizations will have. And so I can imagine if, men were to start taking time off, many organizations won't take to it kindly. They would just look about these guys as slackers and not people whom they need to invest long term in.
From a policy perspective on a larger level, I mean, just zooming out in terms of, at national policy or something like that, I think having some kind of a gender neutral or a fair, I don't want to use the word gender neutral, but whatever, a fair paternal leave policy it has its benefits, especially at a time when we are struggling with the female labor force participation rates, falling the female labor force participation rates. But again, we are talking about, I mean, these kind of policies are in the formal sector. So I think the policy lens should look at what we can do in the informal sector and what is the, what are the compensation or any other kind of design around that we can actually come up with. That I think is the biggest challenge for anybody.
Yeah, Shambhavi, you were talking about that as well, right? You said that who pays for this? I think we all seem to be having a consensus that gender neutral parental leave is important. Maybe we may have some differences around whether it should be equal or whether it should be like equitable. Somebody gets 26 weeks, another person gets maybe 15 weeks or 20 weeks or whatever. But what about the cost of this? It's going to add to significant cost if parental leave is distributed across all genders and everybody. So what are your thoughts around how this can be financed? How do we do this?
Right. Let me quickly summarize where we are, and I think we can take a break and then discuss this post the break.
Yes.
Right. So I think what we have all agreed to is that there are positive externalities of having a gender neutral parental leave policy. The most direct benefit is that the father or the non-mother gets to spend time with the child. The McKinsey survey that Sridhar alluded to also showed that this has a considerable impact on positive family dynamics. And I think stability in the family is something that just makes sense at this point of time. Another indirect effect as well. There is evidence to show that it's going to impact maternity. Women in the workforce, it's going to help people come back quicker. It will ensure that women will get paid, women will not be discriminated against while hiring, right? So the question is how do we actually achieve all of this? So let's just talk about this once we are back from these messages from our advertiser.
Yeah, at this point, I'd like to remind all our listeners that applications for the next cohort of graduate certificate in public policy are open. And we offer 3 kinds of specializations. You can do the advanced public policy, you can do the defense and foreign affairs, or you can do the technology and policy streams. So The applications are open right now for an early bird scholarship. You need to apply by the 23rd of July, and the course starts September 3rd. Yeah, we'll come back after.
So, welcome back after the break. So let's continue on the discussion. How do we fund all this? I think one of the questions we have to seriously consider is India in a position where we can actually fund this gender neutral parental leave, even just to the formal sector. I will come to the formal and the informal sector in a bit. What are the various models? So, for example, some states will will directly fund maternity leave. For example, when I was in the UK studying, we got 6 months of leave that was paid for by the government. And then I was working at the Medical Research Council, which paid for another 3 months. And then you could take another 3 months of unpaid leave. A lot of company sponsors parental leave as well. And that has been shown in studies to inspire trust and loyalty in the company. So there is a bit of incentive to the company, particularly the larger companies, to fund parental leave for their employees. And there's also been proposed kind of insurance model where employees pay in to the scheme, and then the funding for the parental leave comes out of that. India is currently in a place where you can think of it and say that, hey, look, do we have the money? But I think in the long term of it, when it comes to looking at the dynamics, the stability of us as a society, I think it kind of makes some sense for us to now start putting a figure on the amount we require and figuring out ways of how we can pay for this. So I'm actually the Suman, what do you guys think?
Yeah. So one of the things, let's go on a different tangent of insurance itself, right? Like if we look at how this entire maternity benefit that the organizations give in the insurance coverage, I've seen that a co-pay model, right, which has the skin in the game where the employee does X percentage of that. So I think given that, maternity is associated with, to a large extent, is associated with a very positive thing of a baby arriving, and there's joy, there's a lot of things to look forward to. I would say a combination of governmental intervention, like you said, Shambhavi. I was also reading that the Australian government does something like this, right? Paid 18 weeks mechanism. So I would say it would be complementary to get all three entities, the workplace, the individual, as well as the government, to pitch in. But I don't really have a number in that context to put across. But I would say it would favorably work well given the context, because like I said, it's a lot of stake for the individual to have a better policy, and the state or the government itself, the intervention would make sense because it means healthy atmosphere for everybody to look forward to come back as well, and with not too much of trade off. And I would say the positive externality, like we talked about, is just getting women back to the workplace. So I would say a combination of that order would be something that might be feasible.
Yeah, I'm thinking of something slightly different. I'm thinking that there are people who choose not to have children, and there are people who choose to have children, right? So those who choose to have children are benefiting from having parental leave, and those who choose not to have children don't require this leave because they don't need to look after these children and they don't get it. But as far as the organizations are concerned, the organizations are bearing the cost of people making those choices, right? The choice is made by individuals, but the organization bears the cost. What if you decide that the organization will not bear the cost, but maybe the organization will only advance the money towards next, say, 26-week leave. You paid, but it's really a loan which is given to you, and you repay it over the next, say, 20 years or whatever, and and therefore it doesn't feel like a lot to you, and maybe it can be financed through your provident fund or something, and it's money that's deducted from your contributions towards provident fund over the next 20 years of your working life, or 30 years of your working life, whatever the case may be. And that way, organizations are not worried about giving people this leave. If it's gender neutral parental leave, then if people take it, it's their choice, and like therefore they benefit from it, from being able to get closer to their spouses, having better relationship with their children through caregiving, and and actually make it and then participate equally in child development, and uh, and they pay for it themselves over time. What about that?
In the Overton window scale, I would put it as radical at this point in time, Sridhar, because
So you're just calling me nuts, okay?
no, no, no. It's just a very radical idea. Because the only reason I'm saying that is because we are used to a certain, an incentive or a certain amount, and withdrawing that privilege is going to cause a lot of heartburn amongst employees, and then it will become a case of competitive between organizations in their talent retention, talent acquisition policies. It will become, who's giving more, what, that part of it will come to them. So I don't know. But at this point, it just sounds very radical.
Yeah, it might be radical, but I'm just thinking that because
Yeah, yeah.
even giving equal parent, even making paternity leave equal to that of maternity leave would also be very expensive and considered quite radical in India at the moment, right? So, but if you can find a way of financing it in an equitable manner, in a manner that's not too difficult on the employee, at the same time, it sort of takes care of certain immediate needs of the young parents to have access to money. Because if you're a young parent and one income stops at that point, it can be very hard. So you don't have to give up on that income at that time, but you pay for it over the next 20 years or 25 years. I mean, I don't think it should be hard, but yeah, it may be a hard sell. Right.
Yeah, because Shrita, it's like the group insurance, right? Now
Mhm.
the stake is spread across age groups, although there's a probability that people in their older age group are more prone to risk. And that's how this entire group insurance mechanism works, while either an organization, corporate, or any individual is taking, right?
Mhm.
You do a health check, you assess the parameters, and then you're deciding on, okay, what's the risk portfolio there? And based on that your premiums are given. So I would say like Suman said, taking away something that's already existing would be too hard, and telling that okay, it's because a chunk of people would choose otherwise based on their decisions about having a child or not, but the organization is still paying the cost for it, is something that might not go too well.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a retention strategy also, right, Sridhar? Because we're all looking at workplaces which will give us insurance coverage and other perks and benefits. And one of them is, of course, to have a workplace which is conducive for, childcare, to get back women to workplaces, and of course to have a policy which is favorable and fair for everyone.
Yeah. And today, I mean, you're right, Sowmya. I mean, I mean, see, I thought about this idea in one particular way, but I look at it from another way. So today, with a big fight for talent, organizations are finding it very hard to attract talent, get the right people in, or to retain talent is becoming more and more difficult. So I think in certain types of industries, at least, there is a trend of companies in India and in the US and other countries as well, where people are going above and beyond what the law is asking for, and saying that, companies like Twilio, Flipkart, Razorpay, Meesho, Diageo, ABB, many of these companies seem to be giving gender neutral parental leave, increasing and making it possible for either parent to take that 26 weeks of leave. So I think that's something that I think the competitive environment seems to be encouraging such behavior. So that might be one way of seeing change happen.
Also, interestingly, what I saw during the pandemic is a lot of people felt it's a good time to have a child around. And I'm thinking the work from home itself is a very good option for people to have shared responsibilities, because it a way for people to think that, everybody around is party to raising the child. And like Shambhavi was saying, it's not limited to the mother alone. So I felt that is something that might just yield into a better atmosphere for people to manage the parental leave as well, if that flexibility extends to not just the pandemic period, but beyond. Your thoughts,
Yeah.
Shambhavi?
I think we see this increasing trend of nuclear families, of people moving for jobs. And I think that the overall, my perception is that there's a better understanding now that the father also has a role in the bringing up of the child beyond providing financial needs. I think as that takes hold, we are going to see an increased need for a second primary giver to also have the time to devote to the mother and the baby. And hence, for me, the gender neutral parental leave makes sense. But beyond all of this, I think the point that Suman mentioned right at the beginning, right? What about people not employed in the farmer sector? I went to my village very recently, and there were a bunch of farmers who help out on my farm. And I was speaking to one of the ladies, and she was like, "I just 4 girls." And she was telling me that, yeah, when the little one was 3 months, she would put her on a fort and start cooking at 5 o'clock in the morning because people had to be fed. And I was like, when my baby was 3 months old, I was hardly getting up at bed by 8. And the disparity is so huge, right? And the idea of pushing for this sort of parental need now is, I hope, it sparks a bigger conversation of why mothers need more leave. And that's just not from what we do at office. I cannot believe this woman who was doing physical labor, right? The 3 month old baby, right? I cannot imagine that. But they have to. And even having that broader discussion without getting men involved is going to be difficult because it will be like, huh, this is what women do. And it shouldn't be that way. And I have this, yeah, I have a very selfish, indirect push for having the gender neutral leave behind that. Is I want there to be a bigger conversation on how difficult it is to rear a child and why we should be giving people more leeway and more support when they're doing that.
Yeah, I just to bring in one small thing about something I read recently. The periodic labor force survey results are out, and it shows that the reason for women not getting into the labor force is still that they're looked upon to take care of all the care work, right? So, if that is a fact that is borne out, I mean, if that is something that is borne out by all the data that's coming in, it's important to understand that that intervention needs to come from various levels. Of course, organizations, of course, the government. But I think the larger role here is a societal role, changing social norms around this. And once the social norms around this, change, then the demand supply for, you know, jobs and therefore policies around that and therefore, bringing more women into work will change. So my big takeaway is how do you change that social norm? Now, that is
Do
Yeah,
something
something
that,
radical, no, Suman? You have to do something radical up top.
yeah.
yeah,
So Suman,
If
I
I said,
think so that's very interesting. I think it's very important to change the way society looks at it, and people in power are the ones who can do it best. So I was very pleased when I read that Parag Agarwal, who's the CEO of Twitter, he sort of announced that he's going to take time off for the birth of his second child. So he made taking parental leave as something completely normal. You can be like a hard nosed, highly driven, very ambitious executive, and still take parental leave, and it's perfectly okay, right? So he's sending a message across the whole organization that such things are okay. And I think it's things like that which will make an impact. So when senior people within different organizations start taking parental leave and start advocating for it, then it's going to make a big difference. But parental leave being something that young people take, it's not very often that those young people are also CEOs of companies, right? I mean, it's not very often that you hear of CEOs having children, and therefore that might be difficult. But I think it's the few young CEOs whom you do have, if they show the way by saying that this is the right thing to do, and I think society will change. If the law mandates that you must give gender neutral parental leave and believes that it's the role of the father also to participate in equally in bringing up the child, then I think society sometimes takes a little. There's always a lag between the law and society, but we do need to have that as one of the things that happen for society's norms to change.
Great. Thanks, Sridhar. Thanks, Sowmya. And thanks, Suman. I guess we all agree that this is something that India has to have seriously think about. How do we bring in more people to the conversation? How do we ensure that fathers who want to support their children get the time while also keeping their job to do so? How do we ensure that women who have children or women who take maternity breaks can go back?
Thanks everybody for this conversation. We'll wrap it up.
Thank you. Bye.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.